We're reporting from the Lethbridge Courthouse this week for the trial of a peaceful Coutts Blockade supporter. After seemingly attempting to leave the demonstration area, this supporter was charged with assault with a weapon and dangerous driving. He was also unduly smeared by the state broadcaster, who had connected him to racial supremacy. Syd Fizzard for Rebel News, and this week we'll be covering the trial of James Sowery. Sowery was charged in connection with Coutts Blockade demonstrations that took place early last year. If you're unaware of that event, I can tell you from first-hand experience, it was an 18-day demonstration at the Canada-US border that coincided with the Freedom Convoy movement to Ottawa that made international headlines and quite literally changed the political landscape of the world as we see it today.
Well, the Europeans saw what many other people around the world saw. Finally, someone is standing up and doing something about this, because they were seeing the same kind of infringements on their right. And the leaders around the world, the elected governments and the Western democracies, pretty much all followed the very same script. And once the Canadian truckers rose and we will not take this anymore, that's what really got the spark flying around the world, and other people realized we're not alone in this.
These protests were against vaccination mandates and COVID restrictions, and in Alberta, the sentiment was so strong that mandates were lifted during demonstrations. And months later, the resignation of former Premier Jason Kenney became unavoidable. Jason Kenney lied about there being violence at the blockade, alleging that they even assaulted RCMP officers. This turned out to be untrue, and even though the blockade demonstrations lasted 18 days, the former premier never showed his face to talk with the people, who simply wanted to be heard by him and to have a dialogue with their political representatives about the issues that were destroying their lives and the lives of everyday Canadians.
People allied with the protesters, assaulting RCMP officers.
Unfortunately, it was a relatively minor collision, but a confrontation which led to an assault took place as a direct result of that collision.
And that was an assault on an RCMP officer?
No, that was an assault between the two civilians.
Now, James was near the Milk River demonstrations when RCMP say he randomly drove at officers who were situated at a police check stop. They allegedly had to run to, quote, avoid getting hit. James allegedly swerved away and hit some traffic cones at the last minute. He was then arrested and soon charged with dangerous driving and assault with a weapon. This took place on February 14th, 2022, the day RCMP had executed warrants in Coutts. Upon participants finding out that within the local area there was a seizure of weapons and body armor, many started to leave the protest site to show that this was a peaceful movement, which did not seek violent measures.
After the events of yesterday and the news released that the RCMP made arrests and come forward with, and the arrests resulted in long arm, firearms, handguns, and protective equipment being unearthed, we as the Coutts Convoy have decided that as a peaceful protest and to maintain that narrative, we will be rolling out tomorrow morning at 10 a.m.
Later that same day, Justin Trudeau invoked the Emergencies Act because of his own failure to manage the peaceful demonstrations taking place across the nation.
Question, Mr. Prime Minister, when did you and your government start to become so afraid of your own citizens?
That's a very
I
unfair...
am not, and we are not.
Those are my questions.
But not only did James have to suffer through the arrest and charges from that day, he also then had to face a CBC article alleging ties to a white supremacist group on the basis that 2 out of the thousands of alleged demonstrators may have had vague ties to an unnamed group that CBC alleges to have white supremacist beliefs. If possible, we'll try to see what James has to say in response to the CBC's framing of their article. But for now, the Democracy Fund, a Canadian charity focused on constitutional rights, has announced that it will fund the defense of James Sowery and have hired Olivia Manzer of Trach Law to defend him. They aim to ensure a fair trial and set the record straight about the alleged acts of violence in Coutts and Milk River. Today, March 20th, 2023, marks the first day of James Sowery's 5-day jury trial here in Lethbridge. The focus of Monday's proceedings is jury selection, a critical process in which potential jurors are questioned by attorneys and the judge to ensure that a fair and impartial jury is selected to hear the case. We hope to speak with James Sowery and his lawyer to get their perspectives on the case and the ongoing trial. However, after James was arrested, he was released with conditions that might be preventing him from speaking about this publicly. And as mentioned by the Democracy Fund, an impartial jury is key to the defense of James, which may make interviewing his lawyer difficult at this time. But this is exactly why we're here at the Lethbridge Courthouse, so that in coming days we can give you the details about his story. We know what the RCMP and the CBC had to say about all this, but now I'd like to find out what they didn't say. And even more, I'd like to find out the other side of the story from James and his legal defense. As the trial of James Sowery continues, we will bring you updates and a more in-depth analysis of this ongoing Coutts Blockade court case. I want to thank you for sticking to the end. For Rebel News, I'm Syd Fizzard.